The message lasted only 3 seconds before it cut into silence. Commander Santos played it again and again in the dark communications room of Luna Command Center. Static filled most of the recording, but 3 words came through clear enough to freeze his blood. "Help us. Please." Then nothing. Meridian 7 had gone quiet, and 4.2 million human souls had stopped talking to the rest of the galaxy. Santos ran through the corridors until he reached the office of Admiral Cooper. She was a woman of 57 years with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen 3 wars. When Santos burst through her door without knocking, she did not yell at him. She saw his face and knew something terrible had happened. He handed her the data pad without speaking, and she listened to those 3 seconds. Her expression did not change, but her hands gripped the pad so tight her knuckles turned white. Within 1 hour, a reconnaissance squadron was burning through space toward Meridian 7. Captain Wright commanded the lead ship from her bridge and pushed her engines beyond safe limits. She was 34 years old and had grown up on Meridian 7 before joining the fleet. Her parents still lived there. Her younger brother taught children at the colony school. She had spoken to her mother just 3 days ago about coming home for the Harvest Festival. The journey took 11 hours at maximum speed. Captain Wright did not sleep. She stood on her bridge and watched the stars streak past and tried not to think about what she might find. Her crew spoke in whispers around her. Everyone knew someone on Meridian 7. It was one of the oldest human colonies outside the solar system, and millions of families had roots there going back generations. When they dropped out of faster-than-light travel, Captain Wright felt her heart stop. Where Meridian 7 should have been green and blue with oceans and forests, there was only brown and black. The planet looked dead. No lights shone from the night side. No ships moved in orbit. No satellites transmitted signals. The colony that had taken 200 years to build was gone. Captain Wright ordered her ships closer and launched scanning probes toward the surface. The data that came back made several of her crew members vomit. The cities had been turned to glass. The forests had burned to ash. The oceans had boiled away in some places, leaving behind salt flats that stretched for hundreds of miles. There were no life signs. Not human. Not animal. Not even bacteria in most regions. Something had sterilized the entire world. The weapon's signature was unmistakable. Plasma bombardment technology left a specific radiation pattern that no other species used. The Dominion had done this. They had murdered 4.2 million humans, including children and elderly, and people who had never held a weapon in their lives. They had done it without warning and without any attempt at communication. Captain Wright recorded everything and sent the data back to Earth on priority channels. Then she took a shuttle down to the surface alone, despite her crew begging her not to go. She landed in what had been the capital city of New Portland, where she had grown up. Nothing remained but melted stone and ash. She walked through the ruins for 6 hours looking for anything that might have survived. She found a child's toy half buried in debris. A small stuffed bear with one button eye missing. She picked it up and held it to her chest and screamed until her voice broke. The news reached Earth and spread across human space within hours. People gathered in streets and public squares to watch the footage from Meridian 7. They saw the dead world spinning slowly in space. They saw the glass craters where cities had stood. They heard Captain Wright's broken voice as she made her report. And something changed in humanity that day. Something cold and hard settled into the hearts of 18 billion people spread across 200 worlds. Admiral Cooper stood before the United Defense Council in Geneva and presented her findings. The council members sat in stunned silence as she showed them image after image of destruction. When she finished speaking, the room remained quiet for a long moment. Then President Cole rose from his chair. He was 63 years old and had served as a soldier in his youth before entering politics. He had hoped to never see another war in his lifetime. That hope died with Meridian 7. The council voted unanimously to authorize military response. Not a limited strike, not a measured retaliation. Total war against the Dominion until they no longer posed a threat to humanity. President Cole signed the order and then sat alone in his office for an hour staring at a picture of his granddaughter. She was 7 years old, the same age as many children who had died on Meridian 7. Across human space, the military began to move. Reserve units activated. Shipyards that had been building civilian vessels switched to warship production overnight. Veterans who had retired decades ago showed up at recruitment offices asking to serve again. Young people who had never considered military careers lined up to enlist. The grief that had paralyzed humanity transformed into something more dangerous: purpose. Admiral Cooper received her orders on a cold morning in Geneva. She would command the Retribution fleet. 700,000 warships drawn from every human world, the largest military force ever assembled by any species in recorded galactic history. She accepted the responsibility without hesitation, but that night in her quarters she allowed herself to weep. She wept for the dead of Meridian 7. She wept for the soldiers who would die in the war to come. And she wept for the who did not yet understand what they had awakened. Captain Wright returned to Luna Command with the stuffed bear still in her possession. She placed it on a shelf in her quarters where she could see it every day. It would remind her why she fought. It would remind her that 4.2 million people deserved justice. And it would remind her that somewhere in the cold depths of space, the Dominion was about to learn a lesson that the galaxy would never forget. Humanity protected its own, and humanity never forgave. President Cole stood before the camera and looked into the lens knowing that 18 billion humans would see his face. The broadcast would reach every colony and every station and every ship in human space. He had written his speech 7 times and thrown away each draft. In the end, he decided to speak from his heart. He told them about Meridian 7. He told them about the 4.2 million lives stolen without warning or mercy. He told them about the Dominion and their long history of conquest and cruelty. And then he told them what humanity was going to do about it. We will gather the largest fleet in the history of our species. 700,000 warships will carry our answer to the. They believed we were weak. They believed we would accept this slaughter and cower in fear. They were wrong. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Shipyards on 100 worlds began working around the clock. Civilian transport vessels lined up to be retrofitted with weapons and armor. Mining colonies increased production to feed the endless demand for metals and fuel. Every human who could contribute found a way to help the war effort. Admiral Cooper established her command center on the massive orbital station above Earth. She worked 20-hour days organizing the fleet into 7 strike groups of 100,000 ships each. Her staff grew to include thousands of officers and analysts and planners. Maps covered every wall showing territory and human supply lines and projected battle zones. Dr. Karen arrived at the command center on a rainy Tuesday morning. She was 51 years old with thick glasses and the quiet demeanor of someone who had spent decades in laboratories. But the secrets she carried in her briefcase could destroy worlds. She met with Admiral Cooper in a secure room where no electronic devices were permitted. For 30 years, humanity had maintained a secret weapons program. The public knew nothing about it. Most of the military knew nothing about it. Only a handful of scientists and government officials understood what had been created in hidden facilities scattered across human space. Doctor opened her briefcase and showed Admiral Cooper the results of 3 decades of work. Antimatter cascade torpedoes could crack a planet in half. Reality-anchored disruption missiles could tear holes in space itself. Quantum destabilization bombs could turn enemy ships into expanding clouds of atoms. These weapons had been built as a last resort against existential threats. Now that threat had arrived. Admiral Cooper studied the specifications for several hours. The power was terrifying. She could use these weapons to exterminate the entirely. Every world, every station, every ship. Complete annihilation was within her grasp. She looked at Doctor and asked if she had considered what would happen if humanity used such weapons. Would we still be human afterward? Doctor had no answer. She left the briefcase and returned to her laboratory. Admiral Cooper locked the weapon specifications in her personal safe and decided she would only use them if absolutely necessary. She hoped that 700,000 conventional warships would be enough. Fleet Admiral Gregory Park commanded Earth's home defense fleet. He was responsible for coordinating the movement of ships from every corner of human space to the staging areas near the border with territory. It was the most complex logistics operation ever attempted. Millions of tons of supplies had to reach the right ships at the right time. Crews had to be trained and assigned. Fuel depots had to be established along the invasion route. Park worked from a massive holographic display that showed every ship in human space as a tiny point of light. He watched the lights converge day by day toward the border. After 3 months, the fleet was nearly assembled. 680,000 ships had reached their positions. The remaining 20,000 would arrive within weeks. Intelligence reports from space painted a picture of an empire that did not believe humans would actually attack. The controlled 340 star systems with a military of approximately 2 million vessels. They had conquered 12 other species and ruled through fear and brutality. Their supreme commander had ordered the attack on Meridian 7, believing it would frighten humanity into submission. He could not have been more wrong. The galactic community watched these events with growing alarm. Ambassador after ambassador visited Earth to urge peace negotiations. The collective offered to mediate. The Assembly warned that such a large war could destabilize the entire region. President Cole listened politely to each visitor and gave them the same answer. The murdered 4 million of our people. There will be no negotiation. There will only be justice. Some species secretly cheered for humanity, that had suffered under occupation for centuries, that had lost there to conquest generations ago. These oppressed peoples whispered hope to each other that maybe the humans could do what no one else had managed. Maybe the humans could break the. Admiral Cooper called her senior commanders to a final briefing before the invasion began. 47 admirals and hundreds of captains filled the great hall of the orbital station. She stood before them in her dress uniform and spoke without notes. She told them they were about to begin the most important military campaign in human history. She told them that many of them would die and that she mourned them already. She told them that they carried the hopes of 18 billion humans and the memories of 4.2 million dead. And she told them that failure was not an option. The fleet departed Earth space on a clear morning in April. Captain Wright watched from the bridge of her new command as hundreds of thousands of ships moved in perfect formation toward the border. The stuffed bear sat on her console as a reminder of why they fought. Somewhere ahead they waited in ignorance of what was coming for them. That ignorance would not last much longer. The first human ships crossed into territory at exactly midnight on the 4th of May. Admiral Cooper watched from the bridge of her flagship, the Earth vessel Resolute, as 100,000 warships followed her into enemy space. The other 6 strike groups would enter through different sectors, creating a front so wide they could not concentrate their forces. Captain Moore commanded a destroyer at the forward edge of the formation. He was 29 years old, and this was his first real combat mission. His ship, the Swift Justice, carried a crew of 200 sailors who trusted him with their lives. He tried not to think about that responsibility as he watched his screens for enemy contacts. The response came faster than expected. Within 6 hours, a massive fleet of 300,000 vessels moved to intercept the human vanguard. Supreme Commander himself commanded from his flagship, and he was confident of victory. The humans were outnumbered 3-1. His ships were larger and more heavily armed. This would be a quick slaughter that would teach humanity to respect power. Admiral Cooper studied the enemy formation on her tactical display. They arranged their ships in rigid geometric patterns that had served them well for centuries. They moved with mechanical precision and attacked in coordinated waves. It was an effective strategy against other species who fought in similar ways, but humans did not fight like other species. Lieutenant Amy served as tactical officer aboard the Resolute. She was 31 years old and had spent her entire career studying alien combat doctrines. She had identified a weakness in tactics that no one else had noticed. They relied heavily on their formation integrity. If that formation could be disrupted, they would become confused and vulnerable. She proposed a plan to Admiral Cooper. Human ships had better faster than light engines than vessels. They could execute microjumps within combat range. Short hops of only a few thousand kilometers that would take them inside enemy formations before they could react. It was dangerous, and no one had ever tried it in actual combat. Cooper approved the plan immediately. Captain Moore received his orders and felt his stomach drop. His destroyer group would make the first microjump directly into the center of the fleet. They would be surrounded by enemy ships and would have to fight their way out while the rest of the human formation exploited the chaos. It was essentially a suicide mission. He accepted it without complaint. The battle began at dawn on the 5th of May. The fleet advanced in perfect formation, expecting the humans to meet them in conventional combat. Instead, the human ships scattered in what looked like panic. Supreme Commander laughed at this display of cowardice. Then 50 human destroyers vanished from his sensors. They reappeared in the exact center of his formation. Captain Moore opened fire before his ship had fully materialized, and his first salvo destroyed a cruiser at point-blank range. All around him, his fellow captains did the same. Explosions rippled through the fleet as ships died before they could even turn to face the enemy. The chaos was total. Ships tried to fire at the humans but hit their own vessels instead. Their rigid formation broke apart as captains panicked and maneuvered independently. Into this confusion, the main human fleet struck like a hammer. Admiral Cooper led the charge personally, and her guns never stopped firing. The battle lasted 14 hours. Captain Moore's destroyer took heavy damage but survived against all odds. Lieutenant tactical predictions proved exactly correct as the struggle to adapt to human tactics. Ship after ship fell to human weapons until the space between the two fleets was filled with debris and bodies. Supreme Commander watched his fleet die around him. He had brought 300,000 ships to this battle expecting easy victory. By the end, only 120,000 remained. The humans had lost 12,000 vessels. It was the worst military defeat in history. The order to retreat came from himself. His remaining ships turned and fled deeper into territory. The humans did not pursue immediately. Admiral Cooper ordered her fleet to hold position and recover survivors from damaged ships. She walked through the medical bays of the Resolute looking at wounded sailors and thanking them for their sacrifice. Captain Moore was promoted to command a battle group of 50 ships. His performance during the microjump assault had made him famous throughout the fleet. He accepted the promotion quietly and returned to his quarters to write letters to the families of crew members who had died under his command. There were 37 letters. He finished them before dawn. The human fleet advanced into the first controlled system and found something unexpected. The planet below was not. It was populated by a species called the who had been conquered and enslaved generations ago. When human marines landed, they found millions of beings who wept with joy at their liberation. They told stories of cruelty that made hardened soldiers sick, slave camps, mass executions, children taken from families to serve masters. The humans listened, and their resolve hardened even further. This war was no longer just about vengeance for Meridian 7. It was about freeing an entire region of space from monsters. Admiral Cooper sent her report to Earth along with footage of the liberated. President Cole watched the images of grateful aliens embracing human soldiers and understood that the war had changed. Humanity was no longer just fighting for justice. They were fighting for the freedom of beings they had never met. It was the most human thing possible. 6 months had passed since the first battle. The human fleet had conquered 87 systems and liberated billions of enslaved beings from a dozen different species. Admiral Cooper stood in her quarters aboard the Resolute and looked at a map that showed how far they had come. The Of Prime was still far away, but the path was becoming clearer with each victory. Commander Victor Hayes led the ground forces that followed the fleet from world to world. He was 45 years old with scars on his face from battles fought before most of his soldiers were born. His Marines had become experts at planetary liberation. They would land in force and crush resistance while protecting the enslaved populations from harm. It was brutal work but necessary. They had been the first species freed from control. Now they fought alongside humanity with fierce dedication. Their warriors were terrifying in close combat, and they knew territory better than any human map. Other species joined as well. The aquatic provided ships and intelligence. The silicon-based contributed advanced technology. What had started as human vengeance became a coalition of the oppressed. Ambassador Ruth worked from a diplomatic vessel that traveled with the fleet. She was 38 years old and had spent her career building relationships between species. Now, she was forging an alliance that would reshape the galaxy. Representatives from 12 liberated species met regularly to coordinate their efforts. They called themselves the Coalition of Free Worlds, and they looked to humanity as their leader. They did not surrender quietly. Supreme Commander had lost his position after the first defeat, and Emperor Thorn had taken personal command of the war. He ordered desperate measures that showed how frightened they had become. Planet-killing weapons were deployed against worlds that might fall to humans. Biological agents were released that killed thousands of human soldiers before Dr. Karen developed countermeasures. Suicide fleets threw themselves against human formations in futile attacks. Doctor worked in a laboratory aboard a medical ship that followed the fleet. She had not slept more than 4 hours at a time since the war began. Each new weapon required analysis and response. Each new disease needed a cure. She saved millions of lives with her work, but the strain showed on her face and in the trembling of her hands. The human casualties mounted day by day. 3 million soldiers and sailors had died in 6 months of fighting. Admiral Cooper read every casualty report personally. She remembered names and faces and stories. The weight of command pressed down on her, but she never showed weakness to her crew. They needed her to be strong. Captain Moore now commanded a battle group of 100 ships. He had become one of the finest tactical commanders in the fleet. His ships were always first into combat and last to retreat. The sailors under his command loved him because he never asked them to take risks he would not take himself. He had been wounded twice, but refused medical leave both times. The advance continued, but Admiral Cooper faced a difficult decision. Several systems were heavily defended with millions of ships and orbital fortresses. Taking them would cost hundreds of thousands of human lives. She could bypass them and leave pockets of resistance behind her lines. It was risky, but it would save her soldiers and speed the march toward Prime. She chose to bypass. The heavily defended systems were surrounded and blockaded, but not assaulted. Human supply lines stretched thin as the fleet pushed deeper into enemy territory. Critics on Earth questioned her strategy, but President Cole supported her completely. He understood that speed mattered more than territorial control. Emperor Thorn watched his empire crumble from his palace on Prime. Systems that had been for centuries fell to human attack. Species that had served for generations rose up in rebellion. His own military commanders began to question his orders. Whispers of surrender spread through the imperial court. The emperor responded with terror. Anyone suspected of defeatism was executed publicly. Entire families were punished for the failures of their relatives. The population lived in fear of their own government while human ships grew closer every day. It was a recipe for collapse. Ambassador received messages from officials offering to negotiate. Some wanted peace. Others wanted to switch sides. She reported everything to Admiral Cooper but recommended against accepting any offers. They could not be trusted, and any pause in the advance would give them time to rebuild. Cooper agreed. Captain Wright still served in the fleet. She had transferred to a cruiser after her reconnaissance ship was destroyed in battle. The stuffed bear from Meridian 7 sat on her new console just as it had on her old one. She had not taken a single day of leave since the war began. Her crew worried about her, but she refused to slow down. She would not rest until justice was complete. The path to Prime was finally clear. Admiral Cooper gathered her surviving ships and counted 640,000. She had lost 60,000 vessels and 3 million lives, but they had lost far more. Their empire was broken. Their military was shattered. Their subject species had turned against them. Only the remained. Cooper looked at the star map one final time before giving the order to advance. They had thought they could destroy humanity with a single attack. Instead, they had awakened something they could not defeat. Now humanity was coming to their doorstep, and there would be a reckoning that the galaxy would remember forever. The human fleet arrived at Prime on a morning that would be remembered for 10,000 years. 640,000 human warships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. Behind them came 200,000 coalition vessels crewed by and a dozen other species. The largest armada ever assembled in galactic history had come to end the Dominion. Admiral Cooper stood on the bridge of the Resolute and looked at the enemy on her. It was a massive planet covered in cities and factories and military installations. 8 billion lived there. They had built an empire that conquered and enslaved and murdered. Now they huddled behind their last fleet of 500,000 ships waiting for the end. Emperor Thorn broadcast a message to the human fleet. His alien face filled screens across both fleets as he spoke in a language that translation systems converted to English. He claimed the attack on Meridian 7 had been necessary. Humans were expanding too fast and threatening security. The destruction of the colony was a preemptive strike to protect his people. He offered no apology and no regret. Admiral Cooper responded with a broadcast of her own. She did not speak of strategy or politics or the future. Instead, she began reading names. The names of every human who had died on Meridian 7. 4.2 million names spoken one after another in a calm, clear voice. It took 4 hours. The fleet waited in silence as she spoke. When she finished, she said only 3 words: "We remember them." The final battle began at noon. Human and coalition ships advanced in waves while defenders fought with the desperation of the doomed. The space around Prime became a hell of weapons fire and explosions and dying ships. Admiral Cooper directed the battle from her bridge while her staff worked frantically to coordinate 800,000 vessels. Captain Moore led his battle group against the orbital defense platforms. These massive stations had enough firepower to destroy entire fleets. His ships took terrible losses as they closed the distance. Half his vessels were gone before they reached weapons range. But the survivors pressed on, and their guns tore the platforms apart one by one. Captain Wright commanded a cruiser in the main assault on the fleet. She fought with cold precision and killed without mercy. Every ship she destroyed was payment for the dead of Meridian 7. The stuffed bear sat on her console watching with its one-button eye as she avenged the children who had once played with it. The battle lasted 3 days. Neither side retreated or surrendered. They knew this was their last stand and fought accordingly. The humans and their allies knew they could not stop until victory was complete. Ship after ship died in the darkness between stars until the wreckage formed a ring around the entire planet. On the 3rd day, the fleet finally broke. Their last admiral ordered a retreat to the surface, but only a fraction of his ships survived long enough to escape. Human forces established orbital superiority and began landing Marines on the planet below. Commander Victor Hayes led the assault personally with 100,000 soldiers at his back. The fighting on the surface was brutal and close. Soldiers defended their city street by street and building by building. Human casualties mounted, but the advance never stopped. Hayes pushed his troops toward the Imperial Palace where Emperor Thorn had retreated with his personal guard. The palace fell on the evening of the 3rd day. Human Marines breached the walls and fought their way to the throne room. They found Emperor Thorn sitting on his throne in ceremonial armor waiting for death. Instead of killing him, Hayes ordered his soldiers to take the emperor alive. Justice required a trial, not an execution. Admiral Cooper landed on Prime the next morning. She walked through the ruined streets of the capital and saw civilians watching her with fear in their eyes. They expected genocide. They expected humans to do to them what they had done to so many others. She stopped in a public square and addressed the crowd through translation speakers. She told them that humanity had come for justice, not vengeance. The Dominion would be dissolved and its military would be dismantled. Emperor Thorn would face trial for his crimes, but the people would not be exterminated. Their children would not be murdered. Their cities would not be turned to glass. Humanity was better than that. The war ended officially when Emperor Thorn signed the surrender document aboard the Resolute. Admiral Cooper watched as the alien who had ordered the destruction of Meridian 7 put his mark on the paper that ended his empire. She felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion and sorrow for all the lives lost on both sides. A memorial was built on Meridian 7. 4.2 million names were carved into stone walls that would stand for eternity. Admiral Cooper attended the dedication ceremony and wept openly as she read the names of people she had never met but had fought to avenge. Captain Wright placed the stuffed bear at the base of the memorial where it would remain forever. The galaxy learned a lesson from the war that no species would forget. Humanity protected its own with a ferocity that comprehension, but humanity also showed mercy when victory was complete. They did not become the monsters they had destroyed. The coalition of free worlds grew into a lasting alliance that brought peace to hundreds of systems. Ambassador Vex9 spoke at the memorial ceremony on Meridian 7. He thanked humanity for freeing his people and for showing that power did not require cruelty. He said that his children would learn human history alongside their own. He promised that they would never forget what humanity had done for them. Admiral Cooper retired after the war and lived quietly on Earth until her death many years later. Her name became legend. Children learned about her in schools across human space and throughout the coalition. She had led humanity through its darkest hour and brought them out the other side with their souls intact. The dead of Meridian 7 were never forgotten. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, humans across 200 worlds observed a moment of silence. They remembered the 4.2 million lives stolen by them, and they remembered that humanity had answered that crime with justice tempered by mercy. It was the most human response possible, and it ensured that no one would ever make the same mistake they had made. No one would ever underestimate humanity again.